Hello and welcome again to Chapter 3 on the Fix INEC Fix Nigeria Report, Part 1. So in this Chapter 3, I am going to be making a case. I'm going to be making a case to explain the fact that INEC is broken, and this has enabled the ascendance of ineffective elected leaders who have led to the kind of development outcomes that I talk about in Chapter 1, and also have some of the leadership deficits and gaps that I talked about in Chapter 2. So let's take a look of, let's try to make that case for why when we say INEC is broken, what do we mean by that? So the first meaning is that before we talk about why INEC is broken and how it has enabled the ascendance of ineffective leaders, remember in Chapter 2 I talked about the concept of representative democracy, where we have leaders who represent us, right? And periodically we have to make decisions on if they have to go back and continue representing us. So it means that based off of their performance, we periodically have to make a decision on if they should continue doing the work that we've assigned them to do or not. Right? I want you to hold that thought in mind. And in that context of that representative democracy, I want to explore and explain a new concept. And that concept is called the triangular pillars of democracy. And in that triangular pillars, you would now understand the role of INEC as a regulator and the role it plays in enabling those kind of leaders that I talked about in Chapter 2. In a democratic pillar, made up of 3 pillars. The first one is citizenship. Citizens are the heartbeat of democracy in that representative system I told you about, right? So citizens are the heartbeat. Their participation ensures the legitimacy of the democratic process. And for citizens to be effective, they have to be informed, they have to participate, and they also have to be vigilant. They have to engage. So you have citizens, and then you have the leaders. The leaders are the people who the citizens transfer trust or power to make decisions on their behalf. They are the custodians of public trust, and it's expected that these leaders should have competence, character, and capacity. And then the fourth component, you have institutions, and that's where INEC resides, because the intersection or the interplay between the citizens and the leaders, there needs to be a body or a framework that controls that interaction. And that's where the regulators come in. They are like the referees that manage that interaction. INEC is one of those institutions. We call them regulators, institutions. They play a regulatory role. And what do? Because these institutions provide the rule of law, the equity, the fairness, the governance, the system, the processes that enable citizens to choose who will represent them, and also hold those people that represent them accountable. And so if that institution is flawed, it means that the interplay between the citizens and institutions would also be flawed. INEC sits as a regulator. We can decry and say we have poor leaders, quality leaders. We can say we have citizens who are not engaged, who are not empowered, who do not even care about the electoral process. But we also have a regulatory system, regulators, which INEC is inclusive, who do not enable that interplay. And so it enables the leaders to game the system to their own self-advantage. INEC has a role as a regulatory institution to protect the interests of citizens. And what is their role? The first is voter education, voter registration. They have the role INEC plays in that engagement between citizens and themselves is to enable voters to be educated, enable them to register and participate in the electoral process. INEC role in terms of engaging with the leaders is with what they have to do is provide candidate oversight, provide election monitoring, ensure transparent elections, and enable that good leaders emerged from the leadership side of the equation. INEC as an institution, what they are supposed to do is to ensure electoral integrity, manage conflicts between citizens and the leaders, and at least implement technology integrations that would enable and ensure the electoral process is free and fair. So INEC has a very, very important role. But has INEC played a very critical role in living up to the task? To answer that question, we're going to take a deep dive. I won't say deep dive, more like a brief overview of Nigeria's flawed electoral history, the elections that INEC have conducted in the last couple of years. To answer, is INEC broken? Have they really lived up to the expectation of citizens and leaders in that equation? Because the reality is that elections are the cornerstone of our democracy. It enables us to every year pass a vote of confidence on those that we give the power to make decisions on our behalf. So when they're underperforming, we can say no, we don't want them, and give new people the power to make decisions on our behalf. If they're underperforming, if they're performing very well, we still renew their mandate. So if INEC fails, it means that citizens are unable to express themselves the right way. And it now leads to a circle, which I'm going to explain, a circle of distrust and disengagement. The reality, out of the bullies, straight up, INEC has underperformed. There's been a degeneration of electoral outcomes since the colonial and pre-independence election period. So during the colonial and pre-independence period, elections during this period are limited in scope because, things were not too advanced. Participation was restricted to a small segment of the population. Mostly dedicated and property owners were the ones that participated in the elections. And those elections were not too contested because of the limited, engagement. But this led and built a foundation for ethnic and regional political alliances that now has dominated our politics and has led to seed of division. And then we had post-independence. From 1960 to 1979, the first major election happened after independence. That election was plagued by vote rigging. There was violence, ethnic tension. There was widespread allegation of fraud. So all these things we are suffering right now in our elections didn't start today. It has been existing since times immemorial. We had a series of military rule that came and interrupted that process. And then we had a series of transition elections that happened under the military rule. For example, in 1979, we had the military government of General Olusegun Obasanjo. People thought that election was free and fair, but it still remained contentious, particularly regarding the legitimacy of the outcome. The 1993 election was regarded as the freest election, the MKO election, where MKO Abiola emerged as the president, but it was annulled. And that election remains a significant error, blot in Nigeria's democratic journey. It reduced trust in public trust in our electoral integrity. So we now go on to the civilian administered elections from 1999 to 2007. When we transitioned into civilian rule from 1999, the elections were a mess. There was no significant improvement in electoral quality. Even 2023, there was large-scale rigging, voter intimidation, and logistical failures. Come 2027, there was a new law, widespread reports of blatant electoral fraud, political violence. 2011 elections, there was an attempt to address some of the issues with the electoral system. There was improvement in transparency, but we still had issues with post-election violence and tensions and lingering tensions of electoral outcomes. Then came 2015. It was a watershed moment in Nigeria's democratic history. It witnessed the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties in Nigeria, despite the logistical challenges, the reports of vote buying. The elections were largely commended for their credibility, and it showed or signified progress Then we had the 2019 elections. We had the 2023 elections recently. Where do we now? That election was conducted under heightened expectations. There was mixed outcome. IREV that was supposed to work decided not to work. Results that were supposed to be transmitted in real time failed to be transmitted in the degree that was sufficient to ensure that citizens would trust the system. 2023 elections had a significant impact in the level of public trust Nigerians had on the existing institutions. So you can see that over time, INEC was given the powers to manage our elections have continued to underperform. And so the verdict is that INEC has struggled. And then, coupled with the fact that politicians have a weird perception of power. For politicians, they see power as an opportunity to accumulate wealth, to exercise control over people. So it's now a do or die affair. So now when the regulators have failed, the leaders that are emerging who want to take responsibility over making decisions on behalf of Nigerians, because of they realize that things are not, the system is not working, they have a weird perception of power. So when you couple that together, we have a bad mix. So what do you do? What happens? You have severe election violence, monetization of politics, abuse of state resources. So politicians' perception of power in this equation is nothing to write home about. So now what, based off of INEC's inability to conduct proper elections, it has affected citizens' perception of INEC and the electoral process. What has that done? Trust in INEC has fallen down, has gone down the drain. People are not able to view INEC as a trusted institution because of electoral malpractice, logistical challenges, lack of transparency. Public perception of INEC has not been favorable. And some of the real challenges that have affected citizens' perception of INEC has been technology innovations. For example, while we've had BVAS and some form of electronic transmission of results, there's been an inconsistent application of these systems, and this has fueled mistrust. There's also political interference. Citizens also often perceive INEC as lacking in autonomy, with suspicion that it's under the effect or under the control of the ruling parties. INEC has failed in some way to communicate effectively during elections, particularly in clarifying delays and addressing the irregularities. And INEC has often been criticized for failing to ensure voter safety during elections, with citizens fearing for their life and fearing for violence during the electoral process. And this has had a significant impact on the public perception and electoral participation. Citizens want better elections, but they are consistently disillusioned. So the reality is that INEC is broken. INEC is broken. It has led to serious conflicts over electoral outcomes. Nigerians' electoral petition, the number of petitions that happen or that is filed at the end of every election consistently increase. And while the judiciary were expecting to be a very strong regulator as well, there's been a serious reliance on the judiciary to resolve election disputes, as opposed to the electoral process being free and fair, that at the end of it, citizens are happy. And so what do you have? You also have the judiciary, to some degree that most Nigerians have lost trust in. So I have been able to make a case in this chapter, share with you the information that makes you understand that to a large degree, INEC is broken. There's a need to fix INEC. Citizens' perception of INEC has deteriorated. And so, what is the consequence of this electoral failure? When INEC fails to deliver good governance, good elections, what is the consequence of that? What does that lead to? So in chapter 4, we're going to explore the consequence of electoral failures.